So I grew up in Massachusetts in the South Shore. I was sitting out front on my porch and I heard some chatter. It sounded like muffled talking. And by the time I could kind of put my ears to it, I had a loud double whoop. And at that point, I figured it was something strange because it sounded more guttural than an owl or anything, and it came from the exact area where I had heard this mumbling chatter, like people talking from a distance. After that, my next experience was, not long after, I went out to go take a walk, and as I walked around the house, I heard a very crisp, clear knock. So I thought that was very strange that there would be a knock out there. Who would do that? And I knew that Bigfoot do things like that. I always had an open mind about Bigfoot, figured they probably existed. So from that point on, I started having, going out on hikes and going out and trying different areas and paying more attention and looking up more information. I filed a report with BFRO. I was finding tree structures out in the forest. Weird stuff that wasn't naturally happening, X's and bent things over each other and kind of weaved together. Found a large footprint at one point, things like that. And I called BFRO, and Dave came out and did an investigation, and he found some things, some broken trees. And what really triggered me was they said, first time, as soon as we walked in the woods, he looked around and he went, "Looks like a nursery." And I had wondered if they were, if there was a small one with them. The more I thought about it later on, I believe that they were in that area because they were having, I used to get 2 knocks responding. And then later on, before I moved, it was up to 3. So, and I found footprints that were smaller than mine, but, in the snow, barefoot, with weird toes, things like that, So I thought that was, they knew what they were talking about, because fast forward a few years later and things like that are happening. I ducked down to the grass line and I could hear it start to pace. This is right as it's starting to get dark, and it had been there all day, and I could hear it pacing back and forth. And then I got a succession of, the best I could describe it is taking a baseball bat and hitting it against a tree as hard as you could, right in a row, bang, 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 bang. And I knew it was angry, and I stood up and I went, "I'm sorry." And I walked the long way out so it could see me leave. And, for me, it was always about a respect thing. I didn't want to, anger. I've known Christians since we were kids. So I would talk with her a little bit here and there. I mean, I would go on and look up things. And, for me, it was more of a solitude thing, going out for hikes and, a personal experience. I mean, not that there weren't times that I would be fearful. There would be times where I would change direction, feeling as though, the stomach bothering me, the hair in the back of my neck, things that are talked about a lot. And I would turn around and go the other way because it's part of the respect thing. The second time I had double whoops was a few years later. My car broke down right as I was leaving work, and there was only one other person pulling away, and I flagged them down and asked them for a ride home. And they said they would give me a ride most of the way and drop me off the end of the road. So I had to walk in my work clothes with a little pocket knife in my pocket for about 2 hours with, I think, only one car drove by. And this is, Bridgewater Triangle. There's some 1700s graveyards with fog in them, deer running around me, but whatever, I was fine. And I was almost home. And I heard the muttering right next to me on the other, so I'm on the right side of the road, and just in the woods on the other side of the road, I hear that muttering again, not really putting it right away to my first experience, and then a double whoop. And this is, 2 a.m., I'm by myself, and so I go, all right, so I just keep walking, and it walked the woods, followed me, and then we came up to, there was a house, it was all dark, but it was a property, and it stopped. And then I picked up my pace a little and made it home. And that was pretty thrilling. Scary, but thrilling. For me, it's not something to necessarily be afraid of, but obviously to be respected like anything. You wouldn't just go prod an elephant or or anything, or a dog you don't know or whatever. So it's a respectful thing, and that's about it. I mean, I could talk stories all day.
In southeastern Massachusetts, not far from the Rhode Island border, is an area that has become famously known as the Bridgewater Triangle. It's a 200 square mile section of picturesque wilderness that's a place rich in both natural wonder and strange mystery. From swamplands and forests to rocky outcroppings and petroglyphs, this area is a dream location for anyone intrigued by the strange and unusual. The most notable geographic features of the area include Freetown Fall River State Forest and Hakamok Swamp. The triangle was given its name by noted cryptozoologist Loren Coleman in the 1970s, elaborating in more detail in his 1983 book, Mysterious America. The triangle moniker seemed fitting, harkening back to the Bermuda Triangle, a term coined in 1964 for a location in the Atlantic Ocean known for unexplained missing planes and ships. Coleman traced the borders of the triangle from Freetown to Rehoboth and its lower corners, and Abington at its northeastern point. The Bridgewater Triangle has played host to a seemingly endless variety of paranormal phenomena over the decades, causing it to fall squarely within the confines of what many researchers call a window area. A short list of commonly discussed anomalous events will find representation all throughout the territory. UFOs, ghosts, and cryptids in varying shapes and forms, and over a span of many years. Even less common phenomena such as phantom or ghost lights are well represented, described as brightly lit orbs traveling with seemingly intelligent volition. Even less supernatural aspects, though no less mysterious, can be found within the triangle's borders. There have been claims of cult activity within the region, along with unsolved murders and reports of missing people. Strange stone carvings present anomalies at various locations, such as an English language poem by an unknown author, and a mysterious petroglyph known as Dighton Rock, its origins also unknown. Aside from the unusual, there's also a rich historical background, with tales from the Wampanoag tribe utilizing spaces within the region, such as Hakamok Swamp, as a base during King Philip's War in the late 1600s. The triangle itself has been used as a juxtaposition of sorts, serving both as a place of refuge as well as one of death and darkness. Amongst all of these occurrences within the Bridgewater Triangle, however, there is, of course, a record of Sasquatch activity. In In 1970, reports began to roll into local police of a bipedal creature believed to be 7 feet in height, trespassing on local residential properties. It was said to have occasionally run on all fours, perhaps indicating the presence of a large bear. But no such specimen was ever identified. In April of that same year, a run-in with a humanoid creature closely resembling the common perception of Bigfoot was recorded near Hakamok Swamp. 2 law enforcement officers were sitting in a parked patrol car when the rear of the vehicle suddenly and inexplicably rose into the air. A moment later, it was dropped, falling to the ground with a resounding bang. Naturally startled, the officers quickly spun the car around to face the opposite direction and trained the cruiser's spotlight on a large 2-legged figure as it disappeared from view behind a house. Additional rumors can today be found on various websites concerning even more frightening and bizarre appearances. It's been stated that a local hunter took a shot at a large animal on one occasion, which emitted a half-animal, half-human cry. In West Bridgewater, another bipedal creature is said to have stolen a pumpkin from a woman's garden, which she described as having reddish-orange eyes. These incidents were reported in 1988 by local newspaper Cape Way News. In mid-July of 2009, a couple were traveling along Route 140 from New Bedford to Freetown. At approximately 11 p.m., the woman in the car witnessed what she described as a large hair-covered man which made fluid movements and had an ape-like quality. She reportedly let out a scream, frightened by the creature's sudden appearance. The police were called and apparently stated that they had received similar calls throughout the night, specifically mentioning Brayley and Chase Roads, which were located via subsequent exits from the highway Route 140. Upon a follow-up interview with Dr. Brake, the driver of the car described the animal as 7 to 8 feet tall, covered in brown hair with darker brown covering the elongated arms, and having a definitive chiseled jaw. For additional context, this sighting occurred between the boundary of Freetown Fall River State Forest and Bolton Cedar Swamp. The investigator also noted that this sighting was within a few miles of a report just a few months earlier. That report, although it did not include a visual sighting of a creature, cataloged a long trail of footprints in the snow. The footprints went through a neighborhood, going from trash can to trash can, before disappearing into a wooded area. Almost exactly 4 years later, in late June of 2013, another motorist would catch sight of a large bipedal creature near Route 27 within a short walk of the entrance to a landfill near the town of Hanson. A man witnessed a figure he estimated to be 6.5 feet tall emerging from a gravel pit beyond the edge of the road. It was covered in dark hair, had long arms which it flailed into the air as it nearly ran into the side of a vehicle coming the opposite direction that the witness was traveling. It would narrowly avoid being hit before running into a nearby tree line on the opposite side of the road, also adjacent to patches of swamp. The witness would apply his brakes upon catching sight of the creature and witnessed its near-catastrophic collision from approximately 70 yards. The man would state during a follow-up interview with BFRO investigator Dave McCullough, "I will never doubt anyone again."
I think the most quintessential Bridgewater Triangle, Hakamok Swamp area story relates to the early 1970s when 2 police officers were sitting in their car relaxing one evening, and all of a sudden they felt the back of their car being picked up and dropped back down. The police had no idea what it was. They turned and they looked and they saw a really large, very tall, human-like bipedal creature running off into the woods. And that probably is the one that really stands out.
In my opinion, the most interesting and coolest Bigfoot encounter out of the Bridgewater Triangle, hands down, would be the police car lifting encounter. Happened in the 1960s. Basically, there was a rash of sightings in the Hakamok swamp area of the Bridgewater Triangle. Local police were alerted that there were people seeing these strange creatures and describing kind of upright bear. That's sort of what the police were calling it. And there was a woman, so goes the story, was saying that her chickens were going missing. There was all sorts of stuff happening. So basically, there was kind of a bit of a hysteria that had been drummed up, right? So any shadowy figure in the woods would immediately alert attention and would cause a ruckus. So there was one particular police cruiser had been stationed at the edge of kind of this dead-end road near this woman's property, kind of backed in the Hakamok swamp. And this officer, I guess, was just kind of hanging out, probably just bored, sitting there hoping something would happen, or I don't exactly know, but he was basically just on patrol, right? Just sitting in his car. He describes all of a sudden the sensation of his vehicle being lifted into the air. And he says in the kind of, he's hitting the brakes thinking, oh man, maybe he's sliding or something like that. And in the red light in the rear view, he can see kind of just like a hairy torso, something like that. He says he feels the vehicle being lifted and all of a sudden it drops. And he, pulls a spotlight out and he sees this thing kind of run off into the woods. Now, that's kind of the way I've been told the story by people who have actually had contact with the primary source. But if you think about that for a moment, I mean, in the 1960s, a police cruiser, they're made of all metal. I mean, absolutely solidly built compared to vehicles in the 21st century, would have been extremely heavy. So what are the chances that somebody maybe playing a prank and has caused a Bigfoot hysteria in the 1960s is in a gorilla suit and happens to be some kind of power lifter, right, that can lift the backside of a police cruiser up into the air? Now, what's interesting about that story is two of the folks I know that were in contact kind of with the primary sources, one being John Horrigan, who chronicled many of the Bridgewater Triangle stories and is one of the first people to really chronicle not only Bridgewater Triangle, but stories of Bigfoot in New Hampshire and elsewhere. He had actually, kind of talked to a lot of people involved with that case. And then the other one was Paulino, a good friend of mine, who unfortunately recently passed away, but he had basically been involved in paranormal research with the Ed and Lorraine Warren stuff. He had been going back to the 60s, involved in all sorts of paranormal stuff around New England. He had actually met the police officer in question who had had this lifted encounter, and he said that the police officer told him this absolutely happened. Like, I don't have any reason to make this up. And then a third person is Aaron Cadieux, who was a friend of mine. He actually did the Bridgewater Triangle documentary. That's probably the best singular documentary about all the phenomena that goes on in the Bridgewater Triangle.
Hi, I'm Matt Moniz. I'm a local researcher in the Bridgewater Triangle. I'm the science advisor for the show Spooky South Coast. We've been on the air for the past 18 years. I've been researching the unexplained for over 40 years, and in that time I've come across a number of different unusual, paranormal, and extreme cases of the unexplained. I'll share with you the very first paranormal experience I ever had. In roughly March of 1967, in the town called Fairhaven, Massachusetts, my mother, who was 9 months pregnant with me at that time, was traveling home to my father's childhood farm to pick him up. While she was traveling there, it is a rural area in southern Massachusetts, as she was rounding a corner, she saw what she thought was, and I quote, a hippie in a fur coat on the corner of the road. And as she rounded the corner to it, it darted across the road. She had to slam on her brakes. The thing actually slammed its hand on the hood and jumped off the road. And after it jumped off the road, it grabbed a tree, spun around and faced her, who is now stopped with the window to her driver's side right parallel with it. She described this thing as a red-haired, human-looking, but she said it wasn't completely human. She commonly would refer to it as a missing link. She said it had black fingernails, gray skin. It was very muscular and tall. She sat there looking at it for about a minute and a half, and it sat there looking at her. She didn't feel threatened, but she was able to see, number one, that it was male, that it was naked, and that it was covered in hair colored similar to an Irish setter. There was an Irish setter down the road from my grandfather's farm called Rusty, and she said it had Rusty's colored fur. That's what she would always refer to it as. So this is, like I said, before the famous Patterson and Gimlin film. My father, who lived in the area and hunted those woods all his life, said, "You're crazy because you're just a girl from South Boston. You don't know animals from around here." And she got very indignant with him, saying, "I know what I saw." Fast forward, into late 67, the Patterson-Gimlin film happens, and my mother goes, that is what I saw.
I lived in the Boston area for about 20 years, and when I moved back to my hometown of Hanson, when I started a family, I started wondering why everything was named after Native Americans in my town, and sent me on a deep dive into figuring out why. And at the same time, I learned about the Bridgewater Triangle, and I had a number of experiences growing up, and I kind of felt relieved when I heard about the Bridgewater Triangle because it seemed like a logical explanation for some of the crazy things that myself and my family had experienced. I published a book in 2014 about published accounts in the Bridgewater Triangle of Bigfoot. It's in the process of being revised because since then there has been so many more reports. When I initially wrote this, I call it more of a pamphlet because it wasn't that long, because there was not that many stories at the time. The only thing that you would hear about the Bridgewater Triangle and Bigfoot happened years ago. 1978, 1980. There didn't seem to be any modern sightings. But then I learned that they really revved up in 2009. Not really sure why, but in 2009, you have reports from Lakeville, Freetown, Dartmouth, and that's when I started to zone in. And then the Class A in my hometown of Hanson in 2013 definitely piqued my interest. When people would ask me if I believed in Bigfoot, I would say I believe that others believe in it, but it wasn't something I subscribed to because I had never experienced anything. That changed in 2017. My mom got sick, and I was frequenting the same street in East Bridgewater almost daily. And there was a spot on the street, which is now all houses, but at the time, it was just conservation land on both sides. And I witnessed structures being built. I would see the difference day by day. I witnessed that for about 6 months, and then I got curious enough to get out of the car and start exploring. And what I found blew my mind, and I started documenting what I was finding. And then, just out of intuition, I had never heard of anyone doing this, I decided to bring one of my kids' teddy bears, and I left it on a stone wall. And then the next day, when I drove down the street, to my utter shock, the teddy bear was gone, and instead was at least 20 feet of a top of a fresh snapped pine tree. And there were no pine trees in the area at all. So this is the strange part. When I was writing that book, I plotted out the points at that point, no pun intended, of where people had had their sightings. With the exception of John Baker's sighting in the Hakamok swamp, that plot line was a direct straight line. And I was shocked. And I was almost bummed out that the Hakamok swamp sighting actually, messed up the perfect path. And I wrote an article about it on my blog, and I said he moves in mysterious ways because it was just a straight line. And I found that extremely interesting. But as you know, there has so many more sightings. It seems to be ramping up. Why there was an absence of reports from 1980 to 2009, I have no idea. But it definitely has ramped up. I find structures everywhere, and I do know how to tell the difference between something that's natural and something that's not. I can say that I'm starting to believe that Sasquatch is almost a gatekeeper to sacred Native American areas. Can't really think of any spot that anybody's had an experience or where I have found structures or have heard things or had my own experiences that were not sacred Native American areas. So something to think about, and it's just something that came to me in the last couple of months, and I'm going to explore that more. I do believe that reports are ramping up. I don't know if that's because people feel more confident in telling their stories. A friend of mine found 19.5-inch print in her yard, which is like 10 acres of private property, and I don't know, nothing would surprise me, you know.
When assessing the viability of a Sasquatch sighting, there are certain key factors that come into play. Often there is no physical evidence left behind, aside from potential trackways, or maybe a single strand of unidentified hair. We have never officially recovered a body. What then would distinguish a report from a mere fabrication? Often it is within not only the description of the creature, such as how it looked, as well as the kind of movements it exhibited, but also the effect that seeing such a creature has on the witness themselves. This is why a follow-up interview is necessary. Once a researcher is able to speak with a witness, they can hear the emotion in their voice and see body language that would not otherwise come across in a written format. Along with an interview, a sighting is often deemed as plausible when researchers are able to go out to the actual location and evaluate the environment for themselves. By doing this, multiple factors can be assessed or misidentifications ruled out. Furthermore, adding reports to known databases helps establish if there is a pattern of sightings in a particular area. All of these elements converge to add plausibility to a reported sighting.
There's a report and an interview with a woman that was out in the woods with her coon dog on a remote road that runs through the Bridgewater Triangle in the Hakamok Swamp area, and reported for several minutes having a creature that was essentially circling the car in the trunk, and she was so afraid she didn't want to get out, and her dog was acting super weird, and this went on for several minutes. So that was a really interesting occurrence.
I investigated one for the BFRO a handful of years ago, and this was a broad daylight sighting by a very reputable newspaper administrator, an older gentleman who contacted. I did get out and meet him in his house after a couple conversations on the phone during the week, and then I was convinced he was pretty legit and went down, met him, showed me all around his house. That's when I, on a side note, when people have you at their place and welcome you into their home, that's when I tend to think, all right, they're not pulling your chain. And he took me right to the site. And this was a Saturday afternoon, kind of overcast, and he's driving down the road, probably about noontime, and there was maybe 2 cars ahead of him, but after the second car, this thing come down the side of a hill. Just a bank, not very big, but it literally walked out in front, and it kept its eye on him the whole time. So the car's this way, where he's coming from. This thing was looking at him this way. So as he's looking at it, he sees another car from the other direction coming down. So when he sees its arm goes up and it stops in the middle and puts its arms up, these other people in the van, they said there was 4 people in an SUV, and he said they had to have brushed it, or they had to have at least seen it, because the way it jumped and raised its arms, it appeared like it brushed them. They brushed it. And that car went by, and he had already come to a stop by then, so he had a clear look at it, maybe 40 feet, and looked at him one more time and just beelined it in the direction it was going, right into the woods. And like I said, I met him several times, and he was just after he retired, so he had held it in for a while, and now that he's retired, he was actually moving with his family down south, and he wanted to get this out before he moved out of Mass to file a BFRO report. And personally, that's a couple that I have investigated are the ones that stand out to me.
So when it comes to modern encounters in the Bridgewater Triangle, I'm a little bit skeptical of some of them. I think the habitat has just been too cut off from other wilderness kind of corridors. I've heard modern stories. I mean, we even interviewed a guy who said that, I think it was like 10 years ago when he had this encounter, they were in the Freetown State Forest, and they'd pulled into this area, and they were kind of underneath this little cliff, not cliff, little like sand embankment, and something threw large boulders at them and kind of let out these sounds. They never saw what it was, but that was an intriguing one. But I tend to think the older reports are not more legitimate, but I think if Bigfoot is a physical creature, I think that would make more sense in the past, before Massachusetts was as built up as it is. Now, if you look at wildlife corridors and maps, the Bridgewater Triangle is pretty cut off from other areas. I mean, just last year, I believe there was a black bear that went through that area, and somehow it got into the Freetown Forest, into the kind of area of the Bridgewater Triangle, and it was seen everywhere, and people were shocked, and it was this big thing. So I'd find it hard to believe that you have a resident population of these creatures stuck in this kind of very small, an area that gets a lot of human traffic, like the forest down there, the Hakamok. There's been a lot of development in the area around the Hakamok swamp. Even a friend of mine, Mike Wanders, he makes Bigfoot videos. He grew up in that area, and he says, the Hakamok swamp has really diminished in size as development has kind of encroached on that area over the years. And Freetown State Forest is, I don't even know, I think it's like 12,000 acres, maybe a little more. Don't quote me on that. So yeah, I'm a little more skeptical of the modern stuff. I think the older sightings, there was some that were really interesting, like the car lifting encounter. There's a guy out there fishing as well who had an interesting encounter while he was trapping muskrats, fishing and trapping. There's a guy named Joseph DeAndrade who I'd interviewed about 10 years ago for a Bigfoot project about the Bridgewater Triangle. He had an encounter in an area called Claybanks, which is not far from the Hakamok swamp. So yeah, there is a history of reports, but I think modern ones have sort of dried up a little bit. There isn't as many as there used to be.
One story I will share comes from a set of cousins, Tracy and Jolinda. They had both had horses growing up in my town of Wareham, and they would ride out into the woods at night into the local area of Rochester and Middleborough. On several occasions, the horses would stop, and this large creature, that's the way they described it during high school days, very large, dark creature, would walk within 10 feet in front of the horses. Now, what was interesting is the horses weren't spooked, but the girls sure as heck were. The horses, alerted that there was something there, but the horses didn't seem afraid like they would with, sometimes dogs would come chasing out of the woods. The horses would freak out and take off with the girls stuck to their back as they screamed. But they said the horses alerted that there was something there, but they didn't bolt. The horses weren't afraid of whatever this was. And they described this thing as 7 feet tall, very muscular build, dark in color. Bear in mind, this is at night, so seeing distinct colors was a little difficult, but they both said on several occasions in the same rough area of the trails, this thing would come out. And I also have several individuals that in the Taunton River that were literally chased out of the woods with this thing screaming and throwing rocks at them as they were escorted, we'll say, out of the area. I have one person where they were camping out in the Bridgewater area. This thing basically, even though it was a tent, it knocked on the tent, like touching it, tapping it, and they pulled open the flap to see this very large face staring back at them inside the tent. After a matter of few minutes, when they heard the thing walk off, literally just grabbed the top of the tent, pulled everything, threw it in the back of their truck, and drove out like nobody's business after that particular encounter and never went back. I have several folks that have had firsthand what are called, similar to what my mother had happen, roadrunner accounts, where it would run across local back roads. This has happened in Middleborough, Lakeville, Rochester, and Carver and Plymouth.
The modern-day popularity of the Bridgewater Triangle may be attributed, at least in part, to the production of a documentary film bearing the same name. Released in 2013 and directed by Aaron Cadieux, the Bridgewater Triangle featured a number of in-depth and fascinating interviews, including with the man who coined the term, author and cryptozoologist Loren Coleman. Highly regarded by many for its production value and attention to detail, the film helped to introduce the eponymous triangle to a whole new generation of paranormal researchers and enthusiasts. While the Bridgewater Triangle was certainly known before Cadieux's documentary, interest in the area has flourished as the film placed its strange goings-on in front of untold numbers of viewers. As online communities have sprung up across varying forms of social media, enthusiastic viewers from across the globe continue to gather to discuss the film's contents and the inexplicable stretch of New England wilderness which it seeks to investigate. Even works of creative fiction have seen major influence from this mysterious region. 2021 saw the premiere of Bridgewater, a podcast in the form of an audio drama with a full cast, produced by the creator of the Lore podcast, Aaron Mahnke, and written by Lauren Shippen. It starred a roster of celebrities which included such names as Misha Collins, Alan Tudyk, and Melissa Ponzio. The show ran for 2 seasons, culminating after 22 episodes.
I think it really expanded the whole phenomena of the Bridgewater Triangle area with respect to different types of activities, paranormal activities that have been happening there. If you actually go back and look, the first reports of activity go back to the late 1700s during the King Philip's War, where the local indigenous Wampanoag tribe actually reported when they were doing some raiding of some local villages, they reported, this is in the folklore of their culture, reported seeing a really loud, hairy creature that warned them to stop raiding the village and to return back into the swamp. So the reports go back quite a long ways into folklore, yeah.
I think absolutely it has. There's been several documentaries in the last 5 or 10 years and on programs on TV, and there's so many more people. I notice so many groups popping up. So a lot of people go into these spots that they read about in books. You know, a lot of new people into it I've talked to and met, they think they're going to go out and on the first night something's going to happen, they're going to see something. But I kind of joke with them, good luck with that, because 20 years now, I've had 5 incidents. I won't say sightings because I haven't seen it. I haven't laid my eyes on it. But I think there's just so many more people into it and going to these spots. You know, a few people I know from down in that area have said you drive around now and there's always cars at the trailheads or where there's been sightings, people poking around and wanting to find it. Like the recent experience I had, people are already demanding an exact location so they can go, and I've been really ridiculed for why won't you just tell us where it is? I'm like, because we're still studying it, we're still going there, and now that we've had this happen, we know, all right, let's plan the next night out there. I think more people out looking, and it's more eyes and air on the ground and more things that could happen. But I also, like I said, certain areas where people are on dirt roads and there's 10 cars there, and they, like I said, it's bringing more people to those areas, but it could be pushing anything that's away there, like, okay, there's too many people here now. That's just my opinion, that it's bringing a lot of closet researchers or people that were always on the keyboard and just, they want to get involved. And I've had people message me like, hey, where can I go? And I wish it was that easy where you could say, hey, go here, you'll see one. But like I said, it's not like that. It's hit or miss everywhere. And I think these woods in New England are all connected. Recently, I learned 3 of the top 5 forested states in the country, and every state, 3 of them are in New England: Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, which is where we are in Vermont. But a lot of people don't realize that. I always thought it was the Pacific Northwest, California up to Washington, but I think that's why they could be. You don't need an exact location. If you go to a state park and go out, go walk a trail, get a map, go out, all these areas. I think a lot of people are seeing them that aren't looking, that just happen to be hiking or fishing or any of the outdoor recreations. That a lot of the eyewitnesses are hunters, drivers, truck drivers that are on these roads all these odd hours. So I think it could be anywhere. It's hit or miss.
So you've got the Bridgewater Triangle documentary by Aaron Cadger, which again is one of the best pieces, a singular collection of all the different stories. What I love about the Bridgewater Triangle, and I'll get into why I think it has such an impact, is because Bridgewater Triangle is basically a free-for-all of anything paranormal and weird. You've got Bigfoot stories, you've got the weird Pukwudgie lore connected to the Wampanoag folklore, you've got tons of UFO stories, you've got a lot of haunted places, ghost stories, the red-headed hitchhiker, the ghost trucker of Copacabana Road. I mean, more stories that I can even list. The ghost fire scene near Lake Nipponicket, lots of other stories. Then you've got the crime stuff, the true crime, the history, the satanic panic, the cult activity in that area, real murders that happened out there, the death of Marianne Aruda, just some brutal killings that took place in an area. So if you're not even into anything Bigfoot or paranormal related, and you look at the Bridgewater Triangle, you can find stuff, oh, I'm really into the mafia and crime stuff, occult activity, you can find that in the Bridgewater Triangle. So it's got a little bit of everything for everybody. Now, I think that's why it has had such an impact. And the name, right? Prior to the Bridgewater Triangle, you had just the Bermuda Triangle as this hub of weirdness, right? But the Bermuda Triangle is this place in the middle of the ocean. You can't just, hey, let's go visit the Bermuda Triangle tomorrow. You can't just do that on a whim. Whereas the Bridgewater Triangle, it's more accessible, especially in an urban area like Boston. You're wedged between Boston, Massachusetts, and Providence, Rhode Island. We can go drive to the Bridgewater Triangle. Loren Coleman, one of the world's most well-known cryptozoologists, coined that term, the Bridgewater Triangle, because he recognized how enticing that concept of the triangle. Now, a lot of people argue, well, the phenomena it doesn't happen in a perfect triangle, right? Like you've got the Lizzie Borden house in Fall River, Massachusetts, which isn't part of the triangle. People would argue it's part of the phenomena. Well, we as humans like clean lines, we like shapes, right? You've got the triangle used in many other contexts too. So Bridgewater Triangle just sort of stuck because it's easy to conceptualize, oh, there's all this crazy stuff that happens there. And as Aaron Cadger has told me, in like the 10 years or so that since the documentary's come out, I mean, popularity has exploded on the subject. You've got lots of ghost hunters, lots of shows, you've got weekly podcasts that do stories about it. Because think about it, you can look at the Bridgewater Triangle, you could do a whole podcast series about it. Episode 1 is about Pukwudgies, episode 2 is about Bigfoot. 10 episodes later, you're still in the paranormal. You haven't even gotten to the true crime, to the occult stuff. So the Bridgewater Triangle is just kind of an area that now I think has a reputation of its own. And, you know, I think some skepticism needs to be put into it with kind of the modern Bridgewater Triangle, because it is one of those places. Freetown Forest is considered to be the most haunted forest in the U.S. So now people go there and they hear something rustling. Oh man, is that a pukwudgie? Is that the ghost hitchhiker on the road up there? I've driven through there, and at like 3 a.m, we've all of a sudden had, you see a bouncing light in the middle of the road, and you're like, oh my God, is that the ghost trucker? It's just a guy walking his dog at like 3, 4 a.m. Really bizarre, right? So it's like your mind, because the area has that reputation, your mind immediately goes to the strange. Whereas if you were in another patch of woods and you heard that same rustling of the leaves, you wouldn't jump to the pukwudgie conclusion. So it's one of those places that I think people go to experience kind of the magic. And I think a lot of what happens in the Bridgewater Triangle is likely conjecture and people just kind of wishful thinking and wanting something to be strange that's going on. That's not to say weird things haven't happened. Obviously they have. I mean, I heard Thunderbird stories. I've heard stories of strange winged creatures flying out of the road in the Bridgewater Triangle. There's just so many stories. The Bigfoot sightings by the dog track, the Raynham dog track, the red eye, the dog scene, the giant snake. There's a lot of crazy stories, right? So there's just something for everybody, as I was saying before about the Bridgewater Triangle, but it's an area that just has such a reputation now, and I think that's the whole host of phenomena that goes on in the Bridgewater Triangle is why I think it has such an enduring reputation.
The Bridgewater Triangle is made up of several communities, including Taunton, Raynham, Berkeley, Dighton, Brockton, Easton, and of course, Bridgewater. In addition, it's the home of the Hakamok Swamp, an area rich in potential hiding places for any number of hidden creatures. And if witnesses are to be believed, they would seem to include Sasquatch. Even the name given to Hakamok Swamp has mysterious leanings, with ties to the rich native cultures of the region, predating any settlement by European-descended outsiders. The word Hakamok itself is an Algonquin word meaning place where spirits dwell. Beyond the supernatural, however, freshwater swamps such as the Hakamok are teeming with physical life, creating a unique ecosystem within its boundaries. From amphibians and birds to reptiles and mammals, swamps provide a refuge for a multitude of creatures. Within Hakamok, there are no less than 13 rare and endangered species of animals. It's also host to multiple flora, such as the Atlantic white cedar. Bobcats and dragonflies consider the Hakamok home. As Massachusetts' largest freshwater swamp, it's a place of extensive biodiversity. Evidence suggests that ancient peoples understood the importance of this location too, with archaeological remnants dating back over 9,000 years. Although on the surface it may seem that a swamp is a place with little agricultural use and purely a breeding ground for mosquitoes, it's quite the opposite. Plant life within the swamplands filter out pollutants in the water, thereby allowing it to be purified as it flows out of the confines of the region. Annually, 7.5 billion gallons of runoff find its way into the Hakamok, allowing it to function as a water reservoir that helps mitigate flooding in other nearby areas.
So in biology and ecology, there's a term called ecotone, and that's where habitats come together. And anytime you have that, the woodland edge here, compared to this meadow that we're sitting in, that's an ecotone. The edge of a swamp or the meadow that a swamp is in, coupled with the woods or the shrubs that are around that lead into bigger forest, all of that is ecotone. And the magic of the ecotone is the diversity of species that occur there across everything, literally from the geology changing to the plants which support the wildlife, the insects, all of these things. That's a diverse area, that edge effect we talk about. And so a swamp itself is fairly rich in biodiversity, but when you couple that with that edge effect, coupled with whatever is around that swamp, whether it's woods that come up right to it or a meadow that feeds into it from woods, you've got sometimes a multi-layered edge effect or ecotone. And so
And sometimes there's very vast, these swamps can be fairly vast, multiple acres, perhaps hundreds of acres, with islands of habitat within that, which each one of those is an ecotone unto itself, right? And so again, this rich, diverse environment, if I want to go see wildlife of any kind, that's a perfect place to go, and if I'm looking for this mysterious, perhaps unknown, undocumented creature, they have to eat, they have to feed, they have to forage. Chances are they're going to go where there's the most likelihood of them finding food and resources, right? So these ecotone edge environments become great hunting grounds, great foraging grounds, great scavenging grounds.
Hakamok is a really interesting swamp area. It's actually the largest freshwater body of water in southeastern Massachusetts. It's almost 17,000 acres, and it's essentially been that way since the colonists came to America. Essentially, it's essentially been that way, and it's been the name actually Hakamok Swamp refers to again a Native American name called where the spirits dwell, and it's just been known for because of the amount of fresh water, the amount of wildlife that's in the area. There's all kinds of aquatic species, which I do think that would be attractive to Sasquatch in terms of a protein source. It just has all the elements that would enable a creature to live in that area for quite some time.
I think it's very thick and thorny. I've gone down a handful of times. You need muck boots. You need pants. You can't have any exposed skin. In most places, trails you can go in the spring and fall, you can see a good ways into the woods. If you go down there now, everything's grown in. You can't walk 5 feet off the trail without getting cut up and thorns. And I think that's why a lot of the stuff is there. There's been a lot of sightings, especially in the last 20 years, coming forward to other researchers that have sent stuff to me that they're not en masse, but they get, a lot of people don't know where to report it. Who do you report? Who do you call? You're not going to call 911 or the police. You get laughed at. I know I've talked to witnesses that get laughed at by their own family. You're not going to bring it up at work. And if you have a prominent position, it could be career suicide to start talking about this stuff. It's taboo still. And you would think after all these years, people will get more comfortable. But the more witnesses there are, there's more people that they know that believe them. So I think it's just like a spider web that's gradually getting more mainstream, and it's okay to talk about it.
Recently, there was a sighting in March on Route 195 in Marion by Haskell Swamp on a major highway. 195 is a fairly large highway in southern Massachusetts. This thing was standing next to the Haskell Swamp sign. This thing, she said, paralleled the top of the sign, which would have, I drove by it coming here, that would have put it about 7.5 feet tall. Described it as a large black bipedal thing that stood by the side of the road. As she went by, it ran across the road after her car traveled past it. So we have encounters still continuing to this day.
So, heart of the Bridgewater Triangle, a lot of people would argue, is known as the Hakamok Swamp, which is a word from the Wampanoag tribe, which roughly, from what I've been told, I don't know if this is accurate, but I'm going off of what many others have documented prior, means a place where spirits dwell. And it's an area that the Wampanoag kind of feared, but during the King Philip War and the war against the early settlers, which was a very brutal kind of conflict, they had actually retreated into the swamp quite a bit. And over the years, the swamp has had a whole host of Bigfoot sightings. A lot of the ones from the 60s, some of the earlier Bigfoot encounters happened in and around the Hakamok Swamp. You had the former Raynham Dog Track, which was a dog racing area. That's right basically outside the Hakamok Swamp, and there was people who reported seeing a Bigfoot, near the fence by the dog track. You'd be interested in the dogs that were there, I don't know. That's one of the stories, and there's just been other people that reported stuff within the Hakamok Swamp, and it's to this day, even though it's been diminished in size by the encroaching development, and I would find it hard to believe that something larger than a deer could really thrive there. It still has areas that are really tough to get into, and you try to go into like summertime and it's brutal because you've got briars and thorns everywhere, ticks, bugs. It's just a brutal place to try to get through in the summer months, basically from the spring to the fall. And then in the winter, there's a lot of these areas that there's like mud, quicksand kind of areas. It can be very tough to get into spots. One of the Bigfoot encounters that happened back in the day, I think it was in the 80s or the 90s, was a guy out there, he would canoe into some of these areas because you couldn't physically get into these spots. And it can be treacherous. There was a case, 5-6 years ago where these two teens went on a very cold day in the winter, went into the Hakamok swamp, and they actually got lost. They had to be rescued by the police, and I think they had a helicopter out there looking for them. So it's not an area to be trifled with. Now, it's not some giant, expansive wilderness or a swamp like you might have in the Everglades or the Atchafalaya in Louisiana, but it's still a very interesting habitat. And do I think something could live there in the 21st century? I'm skeptical of that. Do I think in the past there could have been encounters? I mean, I do. Again, the police lifting encounter is one of the more intriguing ones, and it happened basically right near the Hakamok swamp.
At a certain point, one does have to ask what it is about the Bridgewater area that lends itself to such a slew of paranormal activity. Even if half of the purported encounters were proven to be fabrications, one would still be left with a deep well of inexplicable events. Areas like the Bridgewater Triangle are often given catchy names as an easy reference point in relevant discussions, but what is it about this particular triangle that makes it so seemingly strange? Or is this idea imposed upon Bridgewater itself a mere projection of human ideas or misconceptions?
Now, over the years, I've run into a number of people that have had encounters in the Bridgewater Triangle of what is known as Bigfoot. They come to me with a number of different encounters where they're either chased out of the woods, or they come into face-to-face encounter where they spooked it because it was doing something and didn't hear them coming up on them. Usually that involves water. Whenever they're near water, they have a sensory deprivation that prevents them, I guess, from being able to hear. And I can get that. Moving water makes noise, and if you got that white noise going on in the background, it's very easy to sneak up on animals. Although I don't think these things are an animal. I think they're more of a people than an ape. My background is analytical chemistry, molecular biology, and genetic engineering. And I've seen the results of some of the genetic testing, and they have a closer relationship to us as humans than chimpanzees or any of the other great apes, if you're to follow the studies that have been done. And I have faith in most of those studies.
There's been some speculation, although definitely not scientifically proven, that there's interesting magnetic particles in the soil of that area that cause these kind of disturbances through GPS and compasses and the like. And in fact, that's one reason why the colonists never really went deep into the swamp area, because it was so hard to navigate, and they got this really strange feeling. But there's theories around the soil itself, the composition of the soil itself, having magnetic type particles that cause these kind of disturbances.
So the Bridgewater Triangle as a concept is intriguing, and we're left to ponder what is actually happening here. Is this just, there have been weird things that have happened here and people associate the weirdness, or is there something inherently strange about this area? Again, you have now the Hakamok Swamp, the Freetown Forest, some of the areas in and around it are basically like a last refuge of wilderness or anything close to a wilderness in an area surrounded by urbanization. You've got Providence, Rhode Island on one side, Boston on the other side, Cape Cod on the other side. So it's completely encroached. So you have some areas like Fall River, Massachusetts, New Bedford, Massachusetts that can be pretty high crime areas. So you do have people that go into those places like the Freetown Forest. And one of the most chilling interviews I ever did was with the former Freetown detective, Alvin Alves, for one of the Beyond the Trails we did. He talked about, they had come upon some really disturbing stuff in the woods. A newborn dead baby found in the woods. Just crime that spills over from the city because people can drive 15 minutes out and be in the middle of nowhere and then, kill their gang rival or whatever the case may be. But when it comes to the sort of the weirder stories, one of the running theories, and this is something that Aaron Cadieux has talked about, especially with the documentary, and he's a complete skeptic of a lot of the Bridgewater Triangle stuff, is that people believe that the events of the King Philip's War and the suffering of the Wampanoag at the hands of the colonists and their rivals at that time in, colonial, British America, when it was still at that time, that there was a lot of suffering, and because of what happened to the Wampanoag, that they cursed the land, and then that has been, all the strangeness that's come out of that has been a result of that. Now, obviously that's not a very, scientific kind of theory, but it's one that's interesting, and I think you can see why people would gravitate towards that because of such a high clustering of strange stuff. Like, you don't just have Bigfoot sightings here. You have pretty much everything, including little midget creatures, the puckwudgies, right? You don't have to believe in any of this stuff, but this is just all part of the folklore, and it's kind of been added onto and compounded, and it's changed over the years, and it's been sensationalized, and there's lots of, kind of elements that have been added onto it that maybe weren't present previously. But do I think real things have happened in the Bridgewater Triangle? I do. I think there's some very unusual things that have happened out there. I've never experienced any of it, but there are some really creepy places that do give off kind of a weird energy when you're out in some of these locations, like particularly the Hakamok Swamp and the Freetown State Forest, to me, are two that are, just for the people factor. And this conclusion I came out with when I did my Bigfoot in the Bridgewater Triangle Beyond the Trail episode was that the true monsters in this case were human beings, not the creatures that everyone's scared of, right? You just have these horrific murders and things that have happened, and those are the true creatures. But also, there's stuff like Dighton Rock, this unusual rock that has these weird petroglyph formations on it that nobody knows where they came from. People theorize they were ancient Portuguese explorers, the Phoenicians, Vikings, natives. And so again, like with the Bridgewater Triangle, there's so many mysteries in it. You could just deep dive on any one of the mysteries and spend, an hour just looking at that one before you've even looked into the full spectrum of some of the encounters out there. So yeah, the Bridgewater Triangle is definitely an unusual place, and it's one that I don't think is going to lose relevance anytime soon. There's always new people getting involved and wanting to look into it and going to explore out there.
One of the more interesting ones I had happened in Middleborough. Two retired Marine veterans were going around various old cellar holes. Here in New England, there's a lot of cellar holes from the past 300 years worth of occupation. So they were going around metal detecting, looking for whatever artifacts they could find. Off of a road called Pine Street in Middleborough, broad daylight, they were going by this area that had a rock with a plaque on it mentioning or dedicating to who had lived there prior. And they went to go look at, the cellar hole. As they were walking, a guttural sound, the way they put it, and a dark figure in the back. So much so that sound, they said, reverberated in their own chests. They said the sound was so loud and so threatening that they said, we're both Marines, we retreated. Now, for a Marine to retreat, that means there's something they think is serious, okay? And they said that they ran out like little schoolgirls.
I do. I think the history of the colonial wars with the Indians, a lot of bloodshed, a lot of death, famine. I think they say the spirits, actually Hakamok itself is an Indian term that means place where evil spirits dwell, the name Hakamok itself. And there's just so many, there's a lot of, on a different note, but there's a lot of hauntings, houses and that, and spirits. And there's been reports of, from UFOs to big cats. I know I talked to a witness that actually seen a big cat in the Bridgewater Triangle, which they say, there's none in mass, they're not supposed to be, there's none. But lot of weirdness down there, high strangeness. Over the years, I've had not myself, I've had 4 Class A witnesses that have seen it broad daylight. One was at nighttime, actually. I had 2 witnesses that were supposed to come out and film today, but they didn't make it, unfortunately. And but even them, they all said they know other people that have seen it, but won't talk about it. You know, that's been repeated so many times that I don't know if it's just bad reputation they don't want, the ridicule, the laughing, but there's been so many, like between different investigators down here, actually since going back to the 60s and 70s as far as people talking about it. Incidents, a lot of sightings. I think the terrain too. The terrain, this is very low-lying as far as you look at the map of Massachusetts. Totally different from Western Mass with the Berkshire Mountains and the environment itself, a lot of bogs. But it's actually pretty thick. Like you can see this woods we're at right now, very thick. Freetown, Fall River line area, not far from State Forest, Freetown State Forest. But over the years too, a lot of incidents down this way. A lot of the ones I've investigated went this far south, but have been more up. If you were going to say the triangle, probably central to northern part of the triangle. In the last couple of years, we've got some really good sound recordings we've been listening to. One I sent to Scott Nelson, who really liked it, which said a lot. We're old friends, and he always says, you know, if you ever get anything, send it my way. And he really liked the sound. And there's been 2 other ones, and the one that I sent to him was just in Rochester, Mass. It was just it's in the triangle, maybe 20 minutes, half hour from here. That was gentleman at 3 in the morning, woken up out of his house and put his phone, and this was over the air conditioner. His house was pretty noisy, and he heard it, woke him right out of a sleep. And he stuck his phone out, got that recording, but the next day he was talking to neighbors who were maybe a quarter mile up the road, the nearest property. And he was talking to them, and they heard the same thing, only they had a deer's leg in the driveway the next day, which really, if you think of the sound and scream, I always say this certain type of scream sounds like something is exerting some strength or power. I got another one from May. A woman found a track in the snow. This was right at the end of spring. It was the last shady spot on our property of the way the trees were, the last spot of snow, and a nice clear footprint, toes, lines in the foot. There's just so much, and waiting for the next one, hoping to see one myself. But just from talking to the witnesses that I've spoke to, they've had me in their house, took me to the spot it happened. 2 of them don't really want to get on camera and talk about it, but they had no problem. I can talk about them. One was gentleman was letting his dog out first thing in the morning and saw what he thought was either a very big deer or something of that size, a mammal, because he's looking at it head on. And as his dog's walking out, his dog came running back, and when he looked more, he noticed this thing's moving, and what the heck is it? Because like I said, he just woke up, his eyes just into, it was just daylight was just starting. And he took 2 steps backwards to grab a flashlight, and when he looked back, it was just gone, which really blew his mind, because there's nothing behind him but a bog and a big wide open area that it had to have gone and ducked down. So he walked out to the wall where he saw it, and he had a stone wall for his property line, and he noticed a couple rocks from the top of the wall that were knocked off. So he figured it out pretty soon when he got one good glimpse before he turned to get the light that ain't a deer. And again, we know he had goats. He had a lot of farm animals on his property. At first he said he thought it was, why is a hunter walking into my property? Something that big, so it was definitely something of size. And as he focused, no, it ain't a hunter, it looks like an animal, so he's thinking deer or moose. And that was another good case, but the one I really liked was, it got published by the BFRO. And gentleman was broad daylight, seen it crossing the road, clear as day. He was maybe 50 yards from it. It was walking across the road. He had to actually slow down, and this come down off a bank down the side of the road. It was overcast, but he had a very good sight of it. An older gentleman too. He was well known at the Patriot Ledger newspaper, and that was his. I think he had to get it off his chest. That's why he reported it to the BFRO, and he moved not long after. But he was sincere about, I really want to tell someone about this before I leave the area. He moved down south, but very credible, very, very credible. And he also said, while this was coming down, he's this way, another car was coming the other way. And he said it got to the middle, and it just stopped and raised both hands up like that. So he thinks it either brushed it, because it's watching him, and it didn't see the car coming down the bend this way. And he said there was people in the car, so there's more people that didn't come forward with anything, that they all had to have seen it because they almost hit it. And at this point, he came to a stop, so he had a very, very good look at it, because he knew, I got to stop for this thing. And first thing in his mind was, what the heck is it? He's seen deer around here. He's seen a lot of the animals that should be in Massachusetts, but this was totally different. It was roughly 7 feet tall, he estimated. He was less than 50 yards to it where it crossed. That was one of the better ones I've done. But yeah, there's been a lot of sightings, but a lot of people that don't want to talk about it also.